Under the heavy press of the summer heat, Jace worked until his muscles screamed and his shirt clung to him like a second skin. The ranch stretched endlessly around him, a place that should have felt like home but instead felt like a cage. The sun beat down mercilessly, and every movement of his body sent sweat trailing down his chest in rivulets, soaking the waistband of his jeans. He tossed his shirt aside hours ago, trying to breathe through the heat, trying to outrun the thoughts that circled his mind like vultures. Solitude had always been his choice, but lately, solitude had felt like punishment. Every nail hammered into wood, every bale of hay hauled into place was meant to keep his hands busy, to drown out the memories he had buried. But she was there, and she complicated everything. Lila had no place in his world, yet somehow, she was in it anyway. He had found her weeks ago, tired and lost, a city girl who didn't belong in dust and silence but refused to leave once she stepped onto the ranch. She said she wanted to help, to stay, to find herself away from the noise of everything she had left behind. He didn't ask for her story, but her eyes told enough, the kind of eyes that carried both heartbreak and defiance, as though she had survived something that tried to break her and was still learning how to stand tall again. Jace tried to keep his distance. He tried to tell himself she was just another temporary presence, someone who would drift out of his life as easily as she had walked into it. But there was something about her persistence that unsettled him. The way she sat on the porch swing and watched the horizon, as if waiting for an answer to a question only the wind could give. The way she slipped into the kitchen and helped Mrs. Collins prepare dinner, her hands steady even when her smile wasn't. And then there were the moments when their paths crossed too closely, her brushing past him in the barn, her laughter echoing in the stable while he pretended not to listen, the brief touches that set his jaw tight because they reminded him of everything he'd sworn off. That night, the world was silent except for the faint hum of crickets and the heavy beat of his heart. He leaned against the wooden fence, his body aching from the day's labor, his chest bare and damp. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, letting the night air try to cool the fire inside him. He thought he was alone until he heard the soft scrape of boots on the dirt. He opened his eyes, and there she was. Lila stood a few feet away, her hair tumbling down her shoulders, her face lit faintly by the moon. She looked at him the way no one had in years, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet curiosity that made his defenses bristle. He wanted to tell her to go back inside, to leave him to his silence, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he found himself watching her as she stepped closer, her breath unsteady as if she were just as unsure as he was. "Long day?" she asked, her voice low, carrying through the still night. He nodded, unwilling to say more, afraid that speaking would unravel the thin line of control he was gripping. But she didn't need words. Her eyes scanned the sweat on his chest, the tense set of his shoulders, the exhaustion carved into his face. Something passed between them then, unspoken and undeniable, a pull neither of them had the strength to fight. Before he could retreat, before he could remind himself of the walls he had built, she closed the distance between them. Her hand lifted, hesitating for the briefest moment before brushing against his skin. The contact seared him, sending a jolt down his spine. His breath caught, his entire body tensing as her lips followed, pressing softly against his chest. Jace froze, every instinct screaming to stop, to push her away. But then her tongue traced across his damp skin, slow and deliberate, and a groan tore from his throat, raw and unguarded. He hadn't made a sound like that in years. "Darlin," he rasped, the word escaping before he could catch it, pure torture. His hands clenched at his sides, torn between gripping her tighter or shoving her away. He hated how easily she broke through him, how quickly she made him feel alive again. He had spent so long buried in emptiness that the heat of her touch felt unbearable. He was losing himself, piece by piece, to the warmth of her body pressed against his, to the sweetness of her mouth tasting the salt of his skin. Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering in the moonlight, and he saw the truth there. She wasn't doing this to tease him, or to toy with his control. She was reaching for something, the same thing he had been starving for without admitting it. Connection, belonging, a reminder that neither of them had to carry their wounds alone. His breath came in ragged pulls as she rested her head against his chest, her fingers curling into his side. Every nerve in his body screamed at the intimacy, at the dangerous tenderness of it all. He wanted her, but it wasn't just about desire. It was about the terrifying thought that if he let her in any deeper, she would see every scar, every fracture in him, and she might walk away. But he didn't move, he couldn't. His arms hovered uncertainly before finally wrapping around her, pulling her closer as if he had no choice but to hold on. The night air thickened, the silence between them heavy with all the things they couldn't say. Jace shut his eyes, his jaw tightening as he pressed his lips against her hair. He knew this moment changed everything. Whatever line they had been pretending not to cross was gone. And though his heart thundered with fear, another part of him, the part that had been locked away for years, ached with relief. Because in her warmth, in her reckless closeness, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. He felt alive. The morning after that night left them both unsettled. Jace rose before the sun, as he always did, pulling his boots on and stepping into the quiet chill of dawn. But there was a weight in his chest that hadn't been there before, a heaviness that came not from work but from the memory of her lips on his skin, of her warmth pressed against him. He had lived so long by a strict code, work, silence, solitude, that he didn't know what to do with the shift inside him. He threw himself into chores, hands rough on the leather of the reins, muscles straining against the weight of bales and harnesses, but no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Lila woke later, her hair still tousled from restless sleep, her mind circling the same thought: she had crossed a line. She hadn't planned it, hadn't thought beyond the need that had pulled her toward him in the dark. She feared she had made a mistake, that Jace would pull away, retreat into the walls he so carefully guarded. And yet, when she remembered the sound of his groan, the way his arms had finally come around her, she knew there was no mistake. Something had cracked open between them, and now they both had to face it. The day stretched with tension, a rope pulled taut between them. At breakfast, they exchanged only a few words, her eyes dropping whenever his lingered too long. He felt it, the pull of her presence like a shadow he couldn't ignore, and it made him restless. By afternoon, the heat pressed heavy again, and tempers followed. He found her in the barn, sweeping straw into piles, her dress dusted with flecks of hay. She looked too soft for this place, too fragile for the roughness of his world, yet there she was, working, trying, refusing to bend under the weight of it. He leaned against the post, arms crossed, watching her until she noticed. "What?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "You don't belong here," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "This life, it's not yours." She stiffened, setting the broom aside. "And who decides that?" "You." "I'm just telling you the truth," he muttered, his jaw tight. "This ranch, this work, it'll eat you alive. You think one kiss means you understand what I am, but you don't." Her chest rose and fell, anger flickering in her eyes. "Don't reduce it to a kiss, Jace. You felt it too. You think I don't see what you're carrying. You're not the only one with scars." The words hit him like a strike, because she was right. She had scars. He saw it in the way her voice sometimes trembled, in the way she stared too long at the horizon, as though searching for something she had lost. He wanted to argue, but the fight drained out of him as quickly as it had come. Instead, he turned, walking out into the light, leaving her standing there with clenched fists and burning eyes. The days that followed were like that, push and pull, closeness and distance. At night, he found himself drawn to her, unable to resist the way she softened his edges. During the day, he kept walls up, afraid that letting her in meant risking everything. They were like two storms colliding, fierce and unpredictable, but each collision carved something deeper between them. One evening, the sky opened in rain, soaking the ranch in heavy sheets. Jace came in from the stables dripping wet, and there she was in the kitchen, her hands busy kneading dough, hair loose around her shoulders. The sight of her stirred something raw in him. He wanted to speak, to apologize for every harsh word, but his tongue felt heavy. Instead, he crossed the room silently, standing close enough to feel her warmth. She looked up at him, her breath catching. For a long moment, neither moved, until finally she reached for his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "Stop fighting me," she whispered. "Stop fighting this." The dam inside him broke then. He pulled her into him, his lips crushing against hers with a desperation he couldn't contain. The storm outside thundered, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside him. He kissed her like a man starving, like he'd been waiting years for this exact moment, and she gave herself back to him just as fiercely. When he pulled back, his forehead pressed to hers, he murmured, "Darlin, I don't know how to let myself have this." "You don't have to know," she whispered back. "You just have to stay." That night, for the first time in years, Jace slept without waking from nightmares. Her body against his anchored him, her hand on his chest calming the storms inside him. When the morning came, and he found her still there, still steady, something in him shifted again. Maybe he didn't have to fight so hard. Maybe he didn't have to carry everything alone. But love is never without its tests. Weeks later, Lila found herself doubting. She stood on the porch one evening, staring at the packed bag at her feet. Old fears clawed at her, telling her she was a fool, that men like Jace didn't keep women like her, that she was temporary, disposable, too fragile to last in his world. The thought of leaving tore her apart, but the thought of staying terrified her too. Jace found her there, his shadow falling over her. His chest rose and fell hard, as though he'd run to get to her. He didn't ask why the bag was there. He didn't accuse or plead. He simply reached for her hand, pressed it against his chest, against the steady thud of his heart, and spoke quietly. "If you walk away, I'll survive. I always do. But if you stay, Lila, if you stay, I'll finally live." Her throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. For all his strength, all his walls, he had bared his truth to her in those few words. She dropped the bag, her arms wrapping around him as her lips found his, and in that moment, she knew there was no leaving. They were not perfect, and they would never be. There would be fights and doubts, scars that sometimes ached in the quiet hours of night. But love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing, again and again, to stay when the world told you to run. And that was exactly what they did. For Jace, she was more than warmth, more than temptation. She was his salvation. For Lila, he was more than fire, more than passion. He was her anchor, her proof that broken didn't mean unworthy. Together, they weren't just surviving anymore, they were learning how to live.